Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Despite often being known as an OSR gamer primarily, the reality is that I will try virtually any RPG that you put in front of me. Whether it's sci-fi or fantasy or horror or rules light or crunchy, I don't really care. What I care about is the way that it's run. Now, there's plenty of ways to run an RPG, and of course the reality is that they are all perfectly legitimate as long as you and your friends are having a good time playing it. And despite the fact that I usually advocate for an OSR style of play, the reality is, I don't care that much what style of play you use, as long as it has one particular thing. That thing is a principle called TUNIC, which is an acronym which will make sense shortly. TUNIC is based off of my understanding of what role-playing games fundamentally are, what makes them special and sets them apart from all of the other types of games that we play. A session that accentuates TUNIC is one that takes what is the core of role-playing games, in my opinion, and puts that at the forefront, and therefore is the most fun, at least for me. Now, to really understand TUNIC, we're going to have to take a step backwards and really understand what I believe to be the core of role-playing games. And spoiler alert, it's not role-playing. Before we dive into that though, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by the Ghosts of Zoazana Mountain, an old school essentials adventure for levels 3 through 6, currently funding on BackerKit. It contains over 20 locations of pure old school dungeon crawling action over the course of 84 pages, with some truly spectacular maps and illustrations. Seriously, just take a look at these. Explore the tangling Bloodbriar Forest, the Crater Valley, and the Sea of Chaos, a rift in astral space from where demons weave their foul influence. The book has only 12 days left in its crowdfunding run, so check it out now using the link below. So what are role-playing games? It's important to start out by not assuming that the core feature of these types of games is the term that we use for them today. RPG is just the name that we eventually settled on, and in the past there were plenty of other competing terms that were often used in place of it. I've written in the past how much I like the term adventure game, and TSR did as well. If you look at a lot of early AD&D books, it actually says adventure game on their spine, where the genre of this book happens to be. And of course, OD&D was originally listed as a rules for a new type of war game rather than an RPG or an adventure game. The term role-playing game actually encountered a lot of resistance early on, because it sounds an awful lot like something that you would do in therapy. Eventually, though, it stuck, mostly because the activity of role-playing was one of the most striking and memorable features of this type of game. All that being said, I don't think the activity of role-playing, as fun and iconic as that is really at the core of what sets these types of games apart from all the others. It was RPG author Vincent Baker that first pointed out to me that role-playing is actually quite widespread across a wide variety of games and isn't special to tabletop RPGs. It's really a technique that can be added to almost any kind of game to add a new element to it. Think about video games, for example. In most first-person shooters, you are playing a role, you're playing a character, but we don't think of those as role-playing games. Or look at board games, for example. In Twilight Imperium, say, you role-play the commander of an alien army with its own culture and history and so forth, but we don't think of that as a role-playing game either. And in tabletop war games like Warhammer, you actually play a variety of characters all at the same time, often who have personalities and unique goals, but again, that's not what we call a role-playing game. Almost any type of game can have role-playing added to it, but that doesn't make it what we would think of as a tabletop role-playing game. And that's a good piece of evidence, in my opinion, that role-playing alone is not sufficient. Another way to look at this is to see what would happen if you really dialed down or even eliminated role-playing as a feature in a tabletop RPG. Does doing so shift it into a completely different genre of gameplay? Does it feel fundamentally different? In my opinion, no. In fact, I would say that it's completely possible to have two players in the very same game, one of which is completely immersed in his PC and making choices as that PC would, while the other player is using his PC more like a chess pawn, moving it around the board and using it as an extension of his will. Now, there might be some conflict at the table between these two players because they might get annoyed at each other for having very different styles of using their PC, but I've certainly seen it happen where players like this can coexist even for long periods of time, whole campaigns, without breaking anything. And to me, that really says that role-playing is not just insufficient for making an RPG, it might not even be necessary. So what is it then that links all of these different RPGs together into a single genre if it's not the fact that you're playing a character? To me, the answer is the fact that these games are open games rather than closed games. So what do I mean by that? The vast majority of games that we play, I would call closed games. That means that they have a finite, closed structure of rules that everyone plays inside of. It's not possible to make a move that is outside the rules, because that would be against the rules. Now, open games, on the other hand, are characterized by a property that S. John Ross has called tactical infinity. And this means just what it says. In any given situation, there is an actual infinite number of things that you can try. Anything that your character could reasonably be said to try and do, you can try and do. You're not limited by the rules of the game, but by the properties of the setting or the world that you're in. Role-playing games, of course, borrowed this whole concept from old war games, especially Kriegspiel, which was the first one to come up with the concept that anything may be attempted. Now, what role-playing games did is they took that idea and they took it off the battlefield and began expanding it until it covered everything in reality. Now, there is a spectrum here when it comes to role-playing games in terms of openness. On one end of the spectrum, you have things like freeform games, which are very much about immersing you in the world, and the rules are just there to help facilitate resolving situations rather than to guide players into doing this or that. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have today more and more games that are adding closed elements back into role-playing games, which restrict the player's actions and kind of guide the action of the gameplay towards one particular theme or genre or things like that. Now, even some of these games that have some closed elements are not 100% closed. They still have elements of openness. So fundamentally, I would characterize them as open games. This element of openness was truly revolutionary and allowed for new experiences in gaming that were not possible before. In an open-ended game like an RPG, you can have these truly free choices that have a lasting impact on the game that neither the game designer nor the game master could anticipate. So if this is the feature that really sets role-playing games apart, these open-ended choices, then in my view, this is what any game session should really be focusing on. This takes us back to the principle that I mentioned before, TUNIC. TUNIC is an acronym and it stands for Time Until Next Impactful Choice. And it's something that I have running in my head, at least subliminally, pretty much all the time that I'm running a game. This is especially important near the beginning of the game. I want to give the players an important choice that will have a long-term impact. For example, most recently I was running The Waking of Willoughby Hall with my local group, and I gave them a choice right away. They had entered the manor, and I had the thieves run out of the forest nearby, being chased by a giant heading towards the manor where the players were hiding. So right away they have a choice. What are you going to do? You could try and lock the doors and force the thieves to do something else. You could let them in and help them hide and keep them safe from the giant. There's a whole bunch of options that are possible. Now, it turns out the players decided to lock the thieves out, and then once the thieves had run off, they decided to fight the giant on foot, and this resulted in one of them getting picked up and thrown through a window back into the manor. It was kind of crazy. I could never have predicted that was going to happen, and it really set the tone for the rest of the session. The point here is to communicate to the players as quickly as possible. Here is a choice, and the result of your choice is going to matter. As the game goes on, you should keep TUNIC in mind and try and keep the time between the different impactful choices fairly short. Honestly, one of the easiest ways to do this is just by creating a traditional dungeon. If you have a mapped out location full of rooms and corridors and so forth, and also treasures and monsters and dangers and traps and all of that sort of thing, then the impactful choices will kind of take care of themselves. Do we go down the left hall towards the firelight? Do we go down the right hall towards the delicious scent that we can smell wafting this way? What do we do about these spinning blades that are in our way? What about this weird creature? Do we fight it? Do we run away? Do we talk to it? All of that's going to have repercussions, and you don't have to do a whole lot to make it happen. TUNIC is also a really good guard against railroading, since railroading really is the polar opposite of giving players impactful choices. It gets you in the headspace of thinking about the game as something that is unfolding, that you are experiencing with the players, and it gets you excited about seeing what's going to happen, rather than being stressed out about trying to anticipate what they're going to do and making it be good. In my experience, no matter what game the game master happens to be running, if he's giving me regular impactful choices to make that have a significant effect on the rest of the session, I'm going to have a good time no matter what the system. I'm getting what I came for in role-playing games, which is to feel like I am really a part of this fictional world. Now, of course, all of this is just my opinion, and as a poll that I did recently revealed, I think a lot of you actually disagree with me on this, and that's totally fine. Down in the description below, put your idea of what you think is the core feature of a role-playing game. If you would like to help support Questing Beast, you can of course subscribe to this channel, buy some of my books or adventures, or join me over on Patreon. You can also subscribe to my totally free newsletter, which keeps you up to date on the theory and news and sales and all sorts of good stuff from around the role-playing game sphere every single month. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.